All right, thanks everyone for joining. Good afternoon and welcome to today's CI Tools webinar. My name is Josh Osborne and I'm the product manager for the CI Tools here in Auckland. And this session is, if you haven't attended one before, essentially we just go through some CI Tools stuff that we've been getting a lot of questions about or that people have asked us to cover. This week I'm going to be looking at a handful of things to do with the coverings tool. Had some questions recently about various bits of that. So I'm just going to go through a sort of a complete how to use the coverings tool thing, covering off a lot of those questions that I've come across recently. So if you are using pretty much any version of ArchiCAD, you'll be able to use coverings. If you don't already, you can get a trial via MyCI. Just go to myci.centralinnovation.com/free trial and you can try it out there if you don't already have that tool. I'm using 24, but the way that it looks and works is roughly the same in most ArchiCAD versions, so this should give you a good idea for pretty much any version. We are going to be recording this session and it'll be available up on MyCI probably about a week from now, and also all of the previous sessions of this webinar that I've run. Last week we covered the CI Sites tool, and the week before that we looked at the Keynotes tool, as well as a bunch of other related questions. Those are all available on MyCI now, and this one will be joining them soon as well. So thanks for joining up. Just before I dive into the coverings tool, there is one thing I wanted to mention, which I've been talking to the support guys this morning, and they said has been coming up quite a lot, and that is with the libraries. One thing that we've been coming across recently is customers migrating projects from older versions of ArchiCAD 23 or something older than that into 24. And something that we're encountering quite a lot is people still loading the ArchiCAD Library 24 folder, 23 folder, or loading the ArchiCAD Library 24 folder as well as their old CI Tools libraries. And this is something that will always cause problems with the tools. We develop the tools to work in the specific version that they are for. While they usually will load, so like the 23 library will load in ArchiCAD 24, generally it will have problems and that sort of thing. We do make the 24 library specifically for 24 and the 23 library specifically for 23. So unless there's some really good reason, I can't think of any reason at the moment, you should always be loading the CI Tools library that belongs to the ArchiCAD version that you're using. So if you are encountering weirdness with tools, so like one common thing is that you're using our doors and windows tools and they're all showing up as dots in your floor plan views, or the 3D windows giving you errors or something like that. It can often be because you're either loading the old library or you're loading the old library and the new library, so there's two of everything. It just confuses the tools a lot, because the way that ArchiCAD works when you're using library parts is that it looks for them by name, and if it finds two of the same thing, it doesn't know which one to use, so it just goes with the first one that it hits. And that can often result in the tools referring to multiple different versions of a file, and it's a big mess. So if you are encountering any sort of weirdly unexplainable issues in migrated projects, it's always worth just checking your library manager and make sure that you're only loading the ArchiCAD 24 library. The same goes for any libraries as well. So the ArchiCAD library itself or any other third-party libraries that you might be using, make sure you use just one version of them and use the one that's built for the version that you're using, because it can cause problems. There will be some other libraries that you probably have, like the Select library, for instance, which doesn't really care what ArchiCAD version that you use, but those are generally sort of libraries of standalone objects rather than third-party tools like our CI tools and some other tools that there are around there. Generally, they just don't like that. So stay away from loading old versions or loading duplicated versions. All right, but enough about that. On to the coverings tool. So the coverings tool is our tool that lets you produce cladding and different roof and slab types. essentially what it does is adds extra 3D detail to your model so that it'll look more like your actual model will in 3D. And when you cut sections and elevations through it, it'll look like how it actually would, because we're actually modeling up the, say in this instance, the weatherboards and that sort of thing. So you can see on this model I have weatherboards all the way around on these walls. I've got a corrugated roof here, which you can see is modeled in 3D, as well as a gutter and some downpipes there. And you can see that everything meets and lines up as it should. And I've also got down here, no, I didn't actually apply it. I've got a slab there. I'm going to apply some decking to that later on as well, so you can see that too. And essentially what the idea is just to be able to bring your 3D model up to the level of detail that you would want to see when you're producing a visualization or something like that. The way that the coverings tools work is that they attach to the building elements in your model. So these coverings here, what you're looking at is the covering, but there is still a wall behind them. The same with the roof and the same with all of the other coverings as well. They attach to a building element in your project rather than being just standalone entities themselves. And so that means that because they're attached, you can make changes to the underlying element and that will be reflected in the covering itself. So if I were to move this window, as you would expect, it moves the hole in the wall, but it also moves the hole in the covering as well because it's attached to that wall. The wall tells it that there's been a change, and so it updates to take that into consideration. And the same is the case with any other coverings elements. So that's one of the strengths of that, is that you don't have to model up some nice 3D detail for your drawings and then have to go through and shift everything once you make a change somewhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove these coverings so that I can show you how we add them. And then I'll go through a couple of things about how each coverings object works and a couple of things that you can do with them that may not be obvious. So I'm just going to delete these wall coverings and these roof coverings here. So you can see we're just back to walls here. Obviously they look like they're corrugated and have paneling on them because of the texture, but they are completely flat apart from the edge of the covering that you can see at the end there. Let's just get rid of that as well so that it doesn't. And we'll get rid of the back one too. All right, so no coverings on those walls there. Now the way that this works is that you select the element that you want to apply the covering to, and then you apply it. So in our case, we've got these walls here. So I'm going to select them all. Go to the CI Tools menu and go to Coverings and choose Wall Coverings. And once you do that, it's going to bring up the settings for the coverings, which will let you choose what kind of cladding you want to use and go into detail of any sort of extra settings that you want to set for that. So you can see at the moment, this is just the default settings. We've got a style is set to custom settings, so we'll look at styles shortly. And then the profile is weatherboards, which is what you could see before. And if we change to the 3D preview, you can see those there. There's settings to control how the weatherboards should be set out here. And if you click on the profile drop-down box here, you can choose from the other covering types here. If you're using older versions of the tool, you may not see this complete list because we have been adding coverings over time, but most of them should be available to you. So we've got, obviously there's a none covering type. Not quite sure why you would use that, but it might become useful if you want to just flick it off without having to make everything go away. But generic is just a simple flat surface that you can apply. Board and battens creates board and battens on your wall. Not quite sure why that preview isn't showing you. And in most of the cladding types, we also have a cladding orientation setting here, so you can rotate those if you want the battens to run the other way. I'm just going to apply those weatherboards and then we'll come back in here so that you can see them actually change on the 3D model. So having the weatherboard selected and not making any other changes just yet, the next thing that happens when you press OK is that it's going to bring up this sort of a outline line of where it's going to draw the coverings, and you've got a little eyeball cursor, and that's to let you choose what side of the wall to place these on. So I'm going to put them on the outside. And once you click there, it'll think for a second, and then it will place the coverings. So you can see we have weatherboards all the way around on those lower story walls now. And because they're attached to the walls, it's cutting out holes for all of the things that it should be. So if I click back on the settings here, we can go through and see. So board and battens, you can see the battens are running vertically here. If you want those to run horizontally, just set that. We'll set our spacing and then hit OK. And you can see we've got a nice board and batten. And because all of the settings here are parametric, you can go through and make these match up whatever you would like them to. If you want to have a sort of a, I'm not quite sure what it's called, but we have a bunch of timber strips across the wall. You can do that using board and batten just by setting the spacing to be much lower. Bricks and blocks will let you set out how you want your bricks to work. We also have this tick box here called model individual bricks. And what that does is normally when you apply the brick, whoops, that's still at 90 degrees. Normally when you apply the brick, what it does is it draws lines across to show the bricks and blocks patterning, but it's not actually modeling the complete 3D brick there. And that's just to save on polygons, because in most cases you don't need that. But if you do want that, you can tick the box here, and that will let them model the actual individual bricks. So you can see the spaces in between, and you can change the sizing of that and everything back in the settings here. Oh, actually, while we have bricks and blocks, the other setting in here is also how you want them to be set out as well. Stack bond is the default, but you've got running English and Flemish there. And again, those ones have been added over time. So if you're using an old version, they may not all be there, but most of them should have at least running and stack. And I think English and Flemish were a little bit more recently added. Corrugate just does some corrugation, as you might imagine. There we go. So that's what you could see on the roof before. That's just to apply the same thing to the walls. Logs does a very similar thing to corrugate, but more sort of rounded. Panels creates it's creating a set out of panels that run across your wall. So you can see here it sets out gaps with panels stuck to them as they go along, and you can change the way that the set out works using, again, these controls here. Ribbed is very similar to corrugate, but it's ribbed, obviously. And then shiplap, you have grooved and smooth options, which you can see there. And then shakes and shingles as well. This is I think a newer one as well. So if you're using ICAD 22 or prior to that, this won't be there, but in 23 and 24 it will. And that also randomizes the surface that's applied to those as well. So if that's what you want, you can do that. And if it's not what you want, you can just set uniform surfaces instead, and it'll draw them all the same. And then lastly, vinyl weatherboards and regular weatherboards, which brings us back to the default. So that set us some nice wall coverings that we've got all the way around on our walls here. The next thing that I want to quickly look at before we jump to another covering style is just the different trims that you can use with the coverings. So at the moment, it's not actually applying any trims at all. It's just putting weatherboards on and cutting out holes. But if we go into the horizontal trims setting here, you can see that there's some trim style options here. Everything's set to custom at the moment, and that custom setting is nothing. But you can apply trims to your wall top. your head height, your sill height, and your wall base. So if I click through on one of these, you'll see it allows us to choose a profile, which at the moment is none. But if you want to draw a sill all the way across, in this case, the head height, you can do that. And once you click OK, you'll see that sill is added. And so you can add those at either of the four different horizontal trim settings: the top of the wall, the head height, the sill height, or the base of the wall. So you can add trims in that way, or you can add trims around openings. And so again, at the moment, these are all set to none by default. But if you want to draw up a head trim or draw some sills or something on all of your windows, you can do that without doing it in the windows themselves. You can come in here and you can just say, I want to apply a brick sill to all of my windows, and it'll just go ahead and do that for you as part of the covering. So you can see it's applied them all there, and you can control the way that those work back in that same setting dialogues. So that's just a nice sort of all-in-one place way that you can do those if you need to. There's also some settings about how it should deal with corners. At the moment, again, those are set to not do anything, but you can change the way that the corners are joined. If I click OK with the weatherboards, that's going to look a little bit odd, but if you're using bricks and blocks, that would make more sense. I'm not going to say that because I'll probably get it wrong, but there's various normal things that you might want to apply to that as well. So you can change the way that it reacts when it hits a corner to turn onto the next covering that's around the corner. So that's the wall coverings, relatively straightforward, those ones to handle. The roof coverings is where things can possibly get a little bit more tricky because just of the nature of roofs having the pitching line and everything as well, they just tend to be a little bit more complex. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply a roof covering to this roof here. So I will go to my roof plan view, select the roof and go CI Tools again, coverings, and choose a roof coverings this time. And then when I come into here, I can choose my default roof type, and this is just going to set the way that it should apply types of covering to this roof, which will make sense shortly once we look at the edge settings. I'm going to go through here. I'm going to choose hip gable, and then I'm going to go to the cladding section, and I'm going to set what my cladding is. And again, we have a very similar interface to what we had with the wall tool. So I'm just going to set this to custom again so we can see this. So the cladding types, we've got none again, and then also flat, corrugate, ribbed, shingle, tiles, and Spanish tiles. Spanish tiles is a newer setting, which won't be available in 22 or earlier, but you should be able to get everything else in those. I'm going to go with corrugate again on these, and I'll just hit OK. And once you hit OK on that, it places them right away because there is no inside or outside. You don't have to do an extra click. And once you do that, you'll see them being drawn up in your floor plan view as well. So you can see the weatherboard lines and you can see the gutters at the edges here. So let's just pop back to 3D. And we should be able to see that nice new corrugate coverings are applied. Now, that's, in a lot of cases, that's probably all you need to do. But there is plenty of control of how this works and looks. And so the first thing I will look at is the way that the edges work. So because I set it to be a gable type, that is what it has assumed each of the edges will mean. But we can go through and we can change that if we need to. So with one of your roof coverings selected, go to the CI Tools menu, Coverings, and go to Edit Roof Edges. And that will bring up a little preview of the shape of your roof. You can see the little arrows showing the fall direction there so that you can tell what orientation you're looking at it in. And you can see what each edge is doing. So you can see we have barges on both of the short ends. We've got a ridge junction at the top and a gutter down at the bottom edge, which is exactly what we want in this case. But if you didn't want that, you can come through here and just select the edges that you want. Let's say we'll go with this edge here. And under selected edge type here, you can go through and change it to something else. So you could add a gutter there, and then make the ridge a apron, and then make the other side have none, let's say. And once you hit OK there, that will make your changes. So you can see we've got our apron up at the top here, which looks a little bit silly now. We've got our nothing at all at this edge. We've still got our gutter. And, sorry, I think I might have done the wrong setting there. Oh no, sorry. This one was set to none, I believe, and this one here was set to be a barge, I think. Oh goodness, I was only just in there. Anyway, that's how you can set the different roof edges, and if anything misbehaves, or if you modify the shape of the roof and add in extra nodes, and you need to control the way that those react, this is where you will do that. So here we go. So we got to let's set this back to something normal. So this side, it was set to a gutter, but because the edge is not of the type it's expecting, it's just drawing the barge on there instead. That looks a bit more sensible. And so the other thing that you might be noticing while I'm working on this is that I've got a downpipe here. This may not always come on by default for you. In fact, it probably won't in most cases. And the way that we draw downpipes is just once you have your roof covering placed, just select it. And if you look at the end of the gutters, there'll be a purple hotspot just sitting there. And that's your downpipe in waiting, as it were. It's invisible at the moment. But if you click on that and move it out to anywhere besides absolutely on the very edge of the covering, it will start drawing a downpipe in. So we can draw that and we'll pull it into over here. And if I jump back to 3D, you should see that new downpipe appear there. And the downpipes have their own purple hotspots on them as well. And so you can use that to change the way that the downpipe is drawn as well. It's a little bit hard to see with the perspective what exactly I'm doing at the moment, but you can see I'm moving around the downpipe and the brackets for the downpipe. And then you can grab the purple hotspot at the bottom and extend it down to as far as it needs to go as well. So that was one of the questions that someone had earlier this week, was just how to get the downpipes to go on. And yeah, it's not immediately obvious that the way that you do that is by grabbing hold of one of the purple hotspots at the end here, but that is how you draw them on. And then if you want to get rid of them, that's also how you do that as well. So if we want to get rid of one of these, you can just grab that hotspot and bring it back to 0 or past if you need to, but bring it back to nothing there, and the downpipe will disappear once we do that. And you can see that back in this 2D view, I still have those same hotspots that I was using to set out the downpipe, so you can do it in a more sensible way than me flailing about in 3D like I was just before. So that is the roof covering. The last thing that I want to show you of the new covering types, and then we'll jump back in and quickly look at styles, is the slab covering. And it does exactly what it sounds like it would do. It's a covering for a slab. So I'm going to select this slab here, and I'm going to go to CI Tools, Coverings, Slab Coverings. We have two different slab covering types. One of them is precast slab for doing foundations and stuff. And then we have CI Tools decking. I'm going to apply a decking to this one. And it works the same way as the others do. It will be attached to the slab, so it's going to pick up the shape of it and everything like that. And we can come through here and we can say what kind of profile we want to use, whether it's flat or reeded. And if it is reeded, if we use square grooves or round grooves. And then you can see there's a bewildering amount of dimensions on there, but they all do make sense for what they're measuring. You've got the complete width of each board, and then the various width and depths of each of the different types of grooves and that sort of thing in these elements. So I'm just going to go with what we have there, and I'll click OK. And after a second, it'll apply my slab covering. So you can see that it's got these nice 3D modeled decking boards running across it now. And because I chose grooved, they all have their own little groove patterns running across there. Now you do need to be a little bit careful if you're applying this to a lot of your 3D model, is that because we are modeling up some fairly rounded large amounts of grooves here, it will push up the complexity of your 3D model. It push up the polygon count. So if you notice that things start slowing down in 3D for you after you've applied a bunch of these, it might be good to dial that back a bit. And the same also goes for the other covering types as well. We do try to make them as simple as we possibly can without losing sort of their visual quality, just so that they don't cripple your 3D views. So you can see if you zoom right in on these, you can see the faceting in the 3D window there, because it's just trying to keep it running as efficiently as possible. But yeah, that is a thing that can happen, is that if you are either running on a very, very large model that you've applied a lot of coverings to, or if you're running a normal size model but on a fairly elderly computer, it can have a little bit of a struggle generating all of these polygons, particularly rounded things. That's the most difficult thing for computers to draw in 3D. If you are hitting that sort of problem, it can be a good idea to just either hide the views that your coverings are on, or set them to something more simple, just as a representation. So set them as flat or something like that, and then maybe go back through and set them all to be corrugate before you do a render or something, so that they can be easier on your machine while you're working with them, and then you still have the option of flicking back to the look good mode later on. The last thing I just want to show with the coverings is the styles. If you have used several of our other tools, or if you've listened to a couple of these webinars, you might have come across styles, which we also use for several of our other tools. The Doors and Windows tool, most notably, but we use styles for our coverings as well. And in this case, they are the thing that we saw early on in the cladding settings here. So we had our profile setting, which sets what cladding we want, but we have a style above that, and at the moment it's set to custom settings, but there'll be a couple of them in there by default, and you can make any of these yourself on the fly. And essentially what this is a sort of a bookmark or a favorite of a certain profile setup. So if I come through here and choose weatherboards, you can see it grays out all these settings here because they are being set by the style now. And if I go through and choose vinyl weatherboards, these will all change. So you can go through and set up different types of weatherboards, and then you could name them all as the styles for each weatherboard type that you might use. And the way that you do that is just by going to custom settings, setting your cladding as whatever you want it to be, and then pressing save as style and entering a name for that. And once you type in the name, it'll give you the option to save it, and then that style becomes available here. So this is a thing that you could do, would be a good thing to do in your template, especially if you are using different types of claddings that you might have different styles for, would be to go through and set out all the different styles there. But even if you're not using different styles, it's a good way of just setting your defaults as well. So if you always use weatherboards that are a certain size and setup, go through and you could modify the weatherboards preset just by pressing the edit style button and then making your changes and hitting save, or by creating a new weatherboard style. Either way, you can go through and set those up for everything, and the same applies to the roof covering as well. So again, you can go through here and you can choose a style, hit edit style, make your changes, and then save it. or go to custom settings and then save as style to create a brand new style. So that's a good way to sort of maintain that everyone is using the same styles of claddings throughout your office and that sort of thing. It would be a good thing to build into your template. One thing that you might be thinking is, why don't we just use favorites? And the reason that we don't use favorites in the case of coverings specifically is that the favorite is going to store all of the information about the element, which includes the fact that it is attached to this specific wall and it has these specific windows and doors cut out of it. And so if I save a favorite of this and then apply it to another covering, it's just going to make that other covering look exactly like this one, including the size of it and the cuts out of it and everything, which is completely useless in almost all cases. And so the styles are what you would want to be using for that instead, so that you can essentially apply a covering to it and then just go through and choose the style that you want. It will achieve the same thing, but it lets you granularly do it on each of your coverings as their own individual coverings, rather than just blatting out the same setting to everything and kind of breaking everything. All right, that is most of what I wanted to cover today. I hope that gives you a good idea of what you can do with the coverings tool. I'm just going to quickly look at the questions panel now, but if you have any other questions that you have thought of as we've gone along, please do enter those and I'll answer what we can do online. Slabbages. No, we're not going to look at slabbages today. Those are part of the objective tool. I could quickly show you some slabbages if you would like. The slabbage tool works kind of similarly to the coverings tool in a lot of ways, in that it is a element that you attach to another element and it stays attached and moves around with it. But that's part of the objective tool. I don't have it set up in my toolbox right now, but essentially how it works is that you have a tool here called Slabbage, and you click on a edge of a slab and it lets you apply something to that edge. If we get to the end and we have time, I will have a look at those quickly, though. I'll just get them set up. If you have two walls, one above each other, sometimes the upper wall will have the shiplap grooves aiming left, and the lower wall, shiplap grooves aiming right. So we apply a shiplap covering, and so the grooves and in fact the set out of anything on a wall covering, because these are horizontally drawn, they should get it right every time. But if 90 degree. If the problem is that some are pointing 90 degrees and the others aren't, I would say just flip the other side to be negative 90 degrees instead, and that should make them match. Having them match automatically, I haven't really come across them not doing that before, but I would guess that it's to do with the direction that the wall was drawn. I don't have a way that you can have it fix those automatically, apart from just setting the rotation on them manually once you discover that one of them has got it wrong. But that's something that I'll look into a bit more. I might get back to you after this and just see what would make sense for it to do, I think. Because, yeah, that's not something I've come across commonly, but I can see what you mean. Thanks for that. With the roof covering, can you have more than 2 downpipes per roof plane? such as along commercial building. At the moment, the downpipes, no, you can't do that. The way that generally I would say that you should do that, if you want to have more than 2 at the moment, would just be to add an extra node into your roof edge, so that it gives it an extra 2 because of that. But yeah, at this stage, it's just the 2. We have 1 hotspot at each end of the roof. But yeah, I'll add that to our new feature requests. I think that might actually already be on there because someone asked about that. Asked me about that about a week or 2 ago. It might have even been you. But yeah, that's definitely something I know people do want to be able to do. But at this stage, no, you can't do more than 2 downpipes. Can you do custom barge ends? Not at the moment, again, but that is another one that would be quite cool to be able to do. Not quite sure how you would want to do the ends. I get what you mean, but I might get in touch with you about that afterwards and just see if I can get some examples of what you'd want it to do, and we might be able to do that as another new feature request for the tool as well. Because yeah, I can see why you would want to do all of those things that you asked about. But yes, you can't do them at this stage. But I know at least one of them is already on the to-do list, and I'll talk to you later about the others and see how best we might be able to do those things. We are actually currently working on some relatively major updates to the coverings tool, the roof covering specifically. So we could be able to build it into the update that those get pushed into as well. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everyone for your time. If you do think of anything else over the next however long, feel free to email it through to our support desk. That's nz.support@centralinnovation.com. And if you think of anything else that you would like to see covered in one of these webinars, send those through to that as well, because I'm always trying to think up things that I can show at these that will be useful to you guys. So if you've got anything that you would like to see covered, and if you do have any other new feature requests, like we've had a couple of here, obviously you can always ask in this webinar and I'll put them through, but otherwise you can just email those through to tech support as well, and they will send those on to me eventually, so that they get put into our list. But thanks for your time, and I hope to catch you next time.